Show me the money.
Hey, it's me. Knock, knock. So, you got my money?
Think about it. You're dealing with numbers all day long. Decimal points, high frequencies, bang, bang, bang. Digits, all very acidic, above the shoulders mustard shit. Right? Kind of wig some people out. Right? You gotta feed the geese to keep the blood flowing. Now keep the rhythm below the belt.
I want to stay in Arizona. I want my new contract. Show me the money! Jerry, you better yell! Show me the money!
Where's my money? You gonna give me my money? Where's my money, man?
Welcome back to Capstrapped. I'm Max Dean, and you can find me on Twitter at PanAmFootball. Today we're going to be talking about the San Francisco 49ers and their salary cap situation, along with some team building strategies for them going forward. Real quick, I threw out a little video and Twitter post to see what people wanted me to talk about. There wasn't really any overwhelming push in any particular direction, and so someone had requested the San Francisco 49ers, and this is kind of the last chance to do it before free agency officially hits. And I can do the Dak Prescott contract next week or anytime really, and the same with DeAndre Hopkins. So I figured I would just take advantage of this one last one before it became irrelevant. As always, like and subscribe if you like the content. It really helps me out. I do all of this stuff very late at night. I have small kids, so I spend a fair amount of time on this, and you guys make it worth it for me when you do that. And in the comments, let me know things that you like, things that you didn't like, and you can mention things that you would like me to cover in the future. I'm doing this about once a week, so I won't be able to get to everything immediately, but if you let me know, I'll fit it in when I can, just like this Niners video. So I'm going to try and move as quickly as possible through this. All of my numbers come from overthecap.com and spottrack.com per usual. What you can expect out of this video right here, I'm not going to give you hypothetical contracts for every single player because they have a ton of free agents. They have a bunch of guys that will need to be extended fairly soon. I'll talk about some of the numbers, but I'm not going to give you a year by year breakdown. What I want to talk about more with the 49ers are kind of some more broad picture team building strategies, because they kind of have two options going forward the way that I see it, and I'm going to talk about all of that stuff. So here we go. So briefly looking at this, these are their top cap hits, the top 20 or so guys there. They have an estimated $25 million or so in space right now. They can create more with some restructures if they need to. Eric Armstead, they've kind of built in a lower cap hit for him already in the first year of his extension. There's not a lot that they could do there. Some of these other guys, D Ford, they could do if they wanted to. Jimmy Ward, they could do if they wanted to basically reduce the cap hit this year to create more space. They could do it with Jimmy Garoppolo if they wanted to. But I'm going to talk about some reasons why they might not want to do that going forward. They still have a lot of good players on their roster, but they have a bunch of free agents that are, up for contracts that they are either going to have to sign or let walk away. So a lot of these big guys, Trent Williams, left tackle, they just traded for last year with minimal investment, but he's a very good player. Jason Verrett, they signed on a flyer, has had a ton of injury issues, had a great year. Richard Sherman, everybody knows him. I don't think I even need to talk about him. Jaquiski Tart, a safety, They're kind of their strong safety, multiple role kind of guy. Solomon Thomas, a defensive lineman, plays a little interior and on the outside. A first-round pick from a few years ago, 2017, I guess that was. K'Wan Williams, nickel corner. Kyle Juszczyk, fullback, very versatile fullback. Kerry Hyder, depth edge player. Emmanuel Mosley, corner. He's an RFA, so they can tag him, bring him back without too much money, which I kind of think they'll do just because if you look at that, you got Verrett, Sherman, K'Wan Williams, and Mosley all as free agents. That's like their entire cornerback group, and I think there might be even another one in there that's like was even less. And Jordan Reed was a tight end who came in and was somewhat productive for them when Kittle was hurt this year. And then I've also included a couple of guys who will need extensions basically this year or next year. That's Fred Warner. This is his last year, so he'll need an extension this year if they want to keep him. And Mcglynche, he will have a fifth-year option next year, but which you can see there in italics. That would be the number, assuming they pick it up. But he'll need an extension at that point. The way that I want to approach this San Francisco 49ers video is who are their current projected core players and who do I think that they should kind of transform their core to be modeled around. Now, the way that I picked this core, the current core, they are players with at least 2 years left on their contract that fit either one of two criteria: a high draft pick, so first or second round, or a substantial financial investment. So basically has to be at least Jimmy Ward, there should be 9.25. Should be at least 9 to 10 million for that. So like Garoppolo, Eric Armstead, D Ford, all those guys are making a bunch of money. And then Nick Bosa, Javon Kinlaw, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. These are all high draft picks, along with Mike Mcglinchey as well. So that's kind of what makes up their core, like their projected core. It's not necessarily like who they are saying is going to be, but if you look at the roster, this is what makes up the core of a team. High draft picks and expensive players with multiple years left on their contracts. Now, who would I look to as their future core? Well, I think we can throw two up there quickly and easily just based on the number of years left and the financial guarantees that they already have and would not really be able to get out of easily. So that would be Eric Armstead and George Kittle. Both have at least 4 years remaining, just signed extensions last offseason. Then you have the 3 first-round picks that they have over the last 2 years. So Bosa, Kinlaw, and Ayuk. They've each only played 1 or 2 seasons so far, so there's plenty of financial investment there. Then you can include Weston Richburg if you want. I'm kind of leaning towards keeping him because I know that center is a kind of a premier position for the Kyle Shanahan offense. So I tend to think that they'll want to keep a guy who, is already successful at running protections and organizing, the zone blocking from the interior there. It's just a very important position, and if you have a good one, maybe don't walk away from that. And then I have a bunch of guys who I would want to extend or bring back to make up the rest of the core. So Trent Williams, Fred Warner, Jason Verrett, Mike Mcglinchey. As you can see, that kind of leaves out a couple of players, D Ford, Jimmy Ward, and Deebo Samuel. Now, Samuel you could keep for 2 more years, but you'd probably have to let him walk. He would need an extension after this year if you wanted to retain him. And I'm not sure that you'll be able to do that with the number of other players that will be costing a lot of money. Okay, so the core would be, an edge player, a couple more drafted players, whether they decided to, keep them or not. In the future, wouldn't really matter because they're still under contract for enough years that they fit into that core category with their rookie contracts. Then you've got, 2 tackles and your center, the most important positions, on the line for this offense. And then Jason Verrett as your corner and Fred Warner as your linebacker. Fred Warner is maybe the best interior off-ball linebacker in the league right now. So let's look at kind of what it would take to bring all of these guys back. The reason that I'm okay with moving on from Deebo Samuel, you're going to be able to find guys like him in the draft. Jimmy Ward is a safety. There are just too many other important positions that need to get paid for me to, pay a safety $10 million who's good but not really like great. D Ford, a really nice luxury, but he's been hurt a lot. And again, you just have more important players. The defensive line has been super deep for you. And so I just don't think you can justify keeping that depth at the cost of everything else. And we'll talk about, other aspects of building the team. But looking at the core projection that I have based on what's already there, this is who I would want to focus on. So as you go back and you look at this, the players that would need to be extended and or given contracts basically this year or next year are Trent Williams, Jason Verrett, Fred Warner, and then probably you could wait a year for Mike Mcglynche. Now let's look at what it would cost to get that done. I'm kind of going to go through each of these guys one by one kind of quickly just to tell you what I think their market value will be, similarly to what I did with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Kicking things off with Trent Williams. This is the top 10 left tackle contracts in the league right now. David Bakhtiari is up top at $23 million, and Jake Matthews is there at $14.5 million. The offensive tackle market had a significant jump this year, and that was all kind of later in the year. So Luan and Nate Solder, they were the highest paid players at the position throughout the offseason, even in 2020. Taylor Decker, DJ Humphries, and Deion Dawkins, although they all signed contract extensions with their respective teams, they were all earlier in the year, like more around free agency. And I think that was smart because none of them are like really elite tackles, and their teams, so that would be the Lions, the Cardinals, and the Bills, knew that their contract value was only going to get higher when guys like Laramie Tunsil, Ronnie Stanley, and potentially David Bakhtiari signed extensions. So they got them done early. A lot of that made sense. But there was a huge jump, and Laramie Tunsil is largely responsible for that because the Texans invested so much to get him over there that they had to pay him highly. Stanley came in just underneath him, even though he probably could have beat him out. And then Bowles, he got a contract extension later in the year when he kind of proved that he was, there to play. I'm still hesitant about that because it was his best performance in a contract year. That always worries me, multiple years into a career. Anyway, so Laramie Tunsil and David Bakhtiari and Ronnie Stanley, they're really the guys who've set the market at this point. So where do I expect Trent Williams to come in on that? Not at the top because of his age, I think. But I think he'd be pretty close. They didn't franchise tag him. The word is that he's close to a deal with them. It's hard for me to say. I would say probably around, this is just me guessing, but around $19.5 million. I think he really likes it there, so he might be willing to go a little bit lower. I mean, open market, he'd break 20. I really believe that. And when you're doing a contract extension, you need to basically offer almost right at what he would get on the open market. Otherwise, he'll just say, I'll just wait till I'm a free agent. So I think that, if they give him pretty close to what he would probably get, he'll stay because he likes it there and it's consistent. So I'm guessing like maybe 19.5 million or thereabouts. Now, Fred Warner, on the other hand, that's a more interesting one. Let's look at the top 10 linebackers. The linebacker market hasn't grown since 2019, although there was a huge jump at that point. And again, C.J. Mosley was responsible for that. After he was a free agent with the Ravens, he almost went back, and the Jets, they just, wrote him a blank check, ended up getting $17 million per year from them, boosting the inside linebacker market substantially over what it had been. And Bobby Wagner was able to cash in on that and get an extension worth more than what C.J. Mosley had directly thereafter. And to be perfectly honest, Fred Warner, I think probably market value would beat that out. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing to talk about because the league doesn't necessarily value linebackers. You can kind of see that when you have a huge jump and then other guys don't necessarily meet that. Like Zach Cunningham, he signed an extension after, the 2019 season, so last off season, and he's a pretty darn good linebacker, and he still, basically beat out the best of the rest. He didn't even touch the C.J. Mosley or Bobby Wagner number. So it's an interesting thing to talk about, but it would be hard to justify not giving Wagner top of the market money because he's been that good. So I've got him just beating out Bobby Wagner there at $18.25 million. And the years remaining there, it's just a kind of an estimate. It doesn't really matter that much. It's a multi-year extension, so it's going to be probably 4, could be 3, could be 5. It doesn't really matter, but more than 2 for these guys is all I can say. Now, Jason Verrett, here's another interesting one. The cornerback market also took a major step forward this year with Byron Jones, Darius Slay, Tre'Davious White, Marlon Humphrey, and Jalen Ramsey all signing new contracts or extensions this year. And every single one of them kind of beat out the market successively, one after the other. So Byron Jones signed as a free agent, beat out Xavier Howard from last year. Then Darius Slay signed an extension, beat him out by just a little bit to become the highest paid. And then I think at that point is when, I can't remember who signed first, either Ramsey or Humphrey. Might have been Humphrey and then Ramsey right thereafter. And then Tre'Davious White came in a little bit under that top of the market value. Probably could have got a little bit more, but so that's a significant jump forward over the 2019 market value for corners of 15. So yeah, that's a pretty big jump. It hadn't really moved a lot in a while. I think it hadn't really truly made a significant move since like 2016. So it was kind of about time, or 2015 maybe it was. So it was kind of about time for that. But where does Verrett slot into here? He played really well. He played at that kind of level where he'd be looking at $16 million a year, but at least I think so. But he has those injury issues. And the thing is that it's not just a one-off year. He's had multiple years playing at that kind of level, but he's just been hurt so many times and missed so many games over the last few years. Or even the entirety of his career. So where do I think he comes in there? It's hard to say. I think that probably he'd be looking at around James Bradbury money, but probably on a slightly shorter term deal with there would be some team protection for injury in there. So, the guarantees would probably be a little bit lower, but he'd get the amount per year, but the guarantees would be a little bit lower, and like he wouldn't get injury guarantees in the same way that a lot of the other big deals get. So I have him at about 14.5 million, like James Bradbury, but I also have 3 years remaining, like a 3-year contract, I imagine, and maybe like, I would imagine that it's 3 for a couple of reasons. One, because the team would be able to get out of it quickly if there were just too many injuries. And then also it would be beneficial for him because if he plays really, really well and doesn't get hurt, he can get another extension after 2 years, while he's still young enough to cash in on a reasonable contract. So I think, if they do bring him back, this is kind of what I would be guessing at for him. And I feel like that's probably not too different from what he would get on the open market. You never know if a team would really overpay just because there aren't really corners on the market this year. But I don't think it would be wise to do much more than what I've got there. And then for Mcglynche, he's a right tackle, so we'll look at those. So Elaine Johnson, I've kind of said before that he is an outlier, really. The Eagles signed him to a left tackle level contract, and I think I was at the time I wasn't totally sure if that was going to mean that the right tackle market was going to catch up with the left tackle market, and that teams were going to start looking at tackles as equitable. Could happen in the future, but at this point, the way that contracts have been signed since that happened, we're not really seeing right tackles get paid like left tackles at all. They still have their own distinct market, which is less than left tackle. Excuse me. You've only got your top 5 guys even going above 10 million as it is right now. And Taylor Moton, usually a market, but he's I put a franchise tag next to him, so it's not really a true. It's not really a market contract. So sometimes I don't include that in these charts here, but I just threw it in there. Just because it's franchise tag this year, I think it's kind of relevant. So where does Mcglynche fit in? That's kind of hard to say. I think he's been pretty good. Now, he's a first-round pick, and first-round picks, they have a pedigree that other players do not. Even if you are a second-round pick, let me put it this way, kind of all things equal. You compare a first-round pick and a second-round pick side by side, they're just as good as each other. Neither are elite, but both are, the very good realm, or the good to very good realm. They're like very close. That first round pick will often get paid a little bit more, like closer to that elite-ish level, just because of that first round pedigree. Like teams remember that. Teams remember going through the draft process and having that guy higher on their draft boards. It's just a thing. It just happens. You'll see it over and over again every single year. There's a guy who didn't play that crazy well, but will get paid a little bit more than other guys around the same level just because of the first round status that he had. So, where is Mcglynche here? I'm thinking that he's probably around Jack Conklin. Could probably go for just over Jack Conklin, maybe 14.5 million. So we'll say 14 million just for the sake of it, and he would probably get a 4-year contract as well. So, there are questions about whether you want to pay 2 tackles, basically close to the top of their respective markets. I think you could do it. I kind of think you should. The zone run scheme is so reliant on a good offensive line that I don't think downgrading in that position is really the right thing to do. Again, you don't have to pay Mcglynche until next year, and you can kind of space out the money such that it makes sense to me. So I've laid out a lot of the important pieces that I think should make up the future core of this team. So next year, the year after that, or this year, next year, the year after that. But there is a noticeable absence here. Jimmy Garoppolo, I do not have here. Why is that exactly? Well, to me, you have a couple of options. Really, two paths that you can take. This core, I would kind of want whether you have Garoppolo or not. So if you're doing that, if you're doing this transition, you're going to be losing a lot of guys, right? You're going to be losing some this year, some next year, just because a lot of these guys will have their cost increased substantially. I mean, Fred Warner is going from a rookie contract, making under $1 million per year, to close to 20. Verrett is going from $1 million to close to 15. Mcglynche is jumping up from 5-ish to 14. And again, this is speculative, but I don't think that even if my numbers are not totally in line with what actually happens in terms of their contracts, they're not going to be that far off. You know, the concept will remain the same. Trent Williams is even going to go up from, I think he was around $13.2 million from his old contract. So he's going to jump up as well. So you're going to just go up in cost for all of these guys. And that means that other guys are going to have to be released and just not retained. One of the things that made the 49ers so freaking good is that they had just such tremendous depth, and they're not going to be able to bring it all back. Now, how much of it you bring back is dependent on the Jimmy Garoppolo situation. So I'm going to look at a couple of the numbers for the total roster construction real quick. If you're looking at the core the way that I've laid it out, in the next year or two, you're going to be looking at paying out approximately $123 million per year in earnings. That's not necessarily what the cap hit will be, but that's going to be the basic earnings. There are ways, which I've talked about in a lot of other videos and I don't want to spend time on right now, but prorate money with signing bonuses, you can lower their cost, you can lower their cap hit in any given year, but you're not lowering what you actually pay them. You're not lowering their earnings, just their annual effect. Then you can throw in your 30 or so minimum type of players. These are later round draft picks. They're undrafted free agents. They're veteran minimum players. You know, a good chunk, when you have this many star players, a good chunk of your roster is going to be made up of guys who are making the absolute minimum. But even so, that averages out to, I think, you know, I didn't really do the math exactly, but it averages out to probably around 0.8 million per player. So like around 800,000 per player. Because I think, you know, the league minimum is around 660,000, and then the veteran minimum for the most tenured players is just over 1 million. So, you know, somewhere in between there is where you're going to find your average, which is about 24 million for all those guys. So you total that up, you have 147 million invested to your top core guys, like your top 10, and then your 30 or so back end players, and then of course you have the in between. So you've got 10 or so $2 to $9 million players, and so if you average that out, let's say it's around 35 million per year for those 10 players. This year in 2021, these are the guys who are getting the most hurt by the lowered cap. But next year probably will not really be the case. So we can estimate that that's still going to be like the per year earnings of that group of players. So then you're looking at around $177 million in total payout. $177 million. You throw in Jimmy Garoppolo, and I know his overall annual contract is slightly higher than that. I think it's 27.5, but 26.7 is what he's going to make over the next 2 years. What his cap hit will be over the next 2 years averaged out. So that's $204 million in approximately 200 or just over 200 million in annual payout for your roster. That's got you right up against the salary cap. So you have a couple of choices, right? So if you actually did that, if you exclude Jimmy Garoppolo and you're looking at the $177 million, that gives you some flexibility. Now keep in mind, to get this done, you're going to have to push a lot of what your top end players are making this year to next year to make this work. It's just going to have to happen. And I don't expect the 49ers to say, no, we're just going to let them all walk. They're going to have to extend guys like Fred Warner. They're going to have to pay guys like Trent Williams, these things. So they're going to be pushing money, from this year to the future. So even if they bring cap numbers down in the future with proration, they're still going to be accounting for stuff from this year. This is not exactly what it's going to look like, but in terms of like what the team budget is going to look like, you're pretty much there. And so now I want to pull up a list of all of the players that they're going to have to let walk this year and next year. Richard Sherman, Laken Tomlinson, Jaquiski Tart, Solomon Thomas, Kyle Juszczyk, Kerry Hyder, Emmanuel Mosley, K'Wan Williams, Jordan Reed, Dee Ford, Deebo Samuel, Jimmy Ward, Raheem Mostert. All of these guys are going to be walking out the door. Yes, you're going to replace some of them with draft picks this year and next year, but you never know how those guys are going to hit, right? You can't make assumptions that they're all going to be as productive and contribute as much as all of these guys here. And one of the things that made the 49ers so good was all of that depth. They were such a deep team. And my thing is, despite the fact that Garoppolo was there, got them to the Super Bowl, I don't think that he was the horse that drew the cart. I believe that, he was more so the cart being drawn by the horse of this very deep and well-coached football team. So when you ask yourself, yeah, we have a good core of players, but we're transitioning with draft picks, trying to hit on more cheap contracts that will work out well for us, like the Jordan Reeds, or, to a greater extent, like the Jason Verretts. Do we trust that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the guy that gets us over the hump as we transition? Are we going to take a major step back this year because we're losing all of this depth? Or do we want to find somebody who is cheaper, allow us to retain more of these players, and get ourselves through that way? And then hopefully this younger player that we're getting, or cheaper player that we're getting, will have more upside. So when the time comes where he has to get paid and we have to move on from some of these guys, he is playing at the kind of level that you need to get, over the hump, being carried by the singular player. Quarterbacks lead teams through the best quarterbacks lead teams. Elite quarterback play will generally get you into the playoffs regularly, and on your down years, you're either just missing or getting knocked out of the playoffs in the wild card round. And that's kind of the wavelength that you're riding. Good to mediocre, good to mediocre. If you're a team like the 49ers, who are built on this incredibly deep roster and the quarterback is just a guy, you're going to have way more variance. You're going to be going up, maybe even to very good to, conference championships. And then as your roster turns over, you're going to drop way back down, most likely. So why would you not want to look for a player who's cheaper if he's around the same caliber as Jimmy Garoppolo, at least you got cheaper. And he might have the upside to be even better. And so the question is, who is the guy, or who are the guys who that is realistic for? There are a few options. I think one is Sam Darnold. There is a relationship between that coaching staff and that front office and the coaching staff that is now at the New York Jets. So that's a possibility. A quarterback in the draft. Picking at 12, you'd have to trade up depending on how the top 10 goes. You might have to trade up to pick 3. Or you might have to just only trade up to pick 6. It just kind of depends. I tend to think it'd be the higher of the two. I think you'd have to go up to 3, but I don't know that for certain. And then there are also options like Jameis Winston, a higher upside player, but who is in this unique situation where he, is probably not going to make a whole heck of a lot of money. So any of these guys are going to be a huge drop down from Jimmy Garoppolo, right, in terms of cost. Sam Darnold this year would cost them $3 million. A top 10 drafted quarterback is probably going to cost somewhere in the realm of, like, I haven't looked at the projections, but I think it'd be around probably 8 or 9 million. So almost 20 million cut off there. Jameis Winston, it's hard to say exactly what his market value would be. It's a weird situation, but you're probably looking at saving almost 20 million there. In cap space. And I think that, if I were them, I'd be looking less at Jameis and more at either the drafting the quarterback or Sam Darnold. But either way, I think Shanahan's offense is such that you're going to be able to have a productive offense moving on from Garoppolo to one of those other guys. And then you're hoping that they grow in the system and become the horse that carries the cart, that pulls the cart. With Garoppolo, you already know that's not the case. And he has an injury, history, which is frustrating and unfortunate. But, it's not even the main thing that I'm taking into consideration here. It's that, as the roster potentially deteriorates around him, you just pretty much know he's not going to be the guy. And so why not maintain a better roster while getting cheaper? Keep yourself in the same situation by transitioning to a cheaper quarterback and then hoping that he becomes the guy. And so, ultimately, I know it'll be expensive to trade up. But, if a trade for Sam Darnold doesn't sound reasonable to them in terms of what the Jets are looking for or what another team might offer for Darnold to drive the price up higher than what the 49ers would want, then, the draft would be the way to go. And if you have to get up to pick number 6 or pick number 3, whatever, it's going to be expensive, but I would do it. I really would. And here's the other thing. I don't really think that Deshaun Watson would get there, but if they can make that trade happen, I am okay with it because suddenly you have the guy. You have the guy that pulls the cart. And yeah, they would lose a bunch of free agents. Yeah, it would be a bit tough for them, with the cap for the next couple of years, but they could make it work. And suddenly the depth of the team doesn't have to become their strength. It's the fact that they have some star players, they have a franchise quarterback, and they have, Kyle Shanahan there to coach and run the team. So, I've kind of laid out who I think the most important players are and what I would do with the quarterback position. and I've given you all the reasons why. And just keep in mind that a lot of these numbers are pure speculation, and it's so hard to estimate anything because, like, with any given player, a team could sign him to $15 million per year, and, you know, for that particular player, they might run him closer to $15 million and then prorate other ones. Or for that player, they might have him costing against the cap only $4 million, and other players are more expensive. Or they might, you know, make all of them cheap this year. It's so hard to predict. So that's why I didn't go into great detail, but I tried to give you annual value. And the reason I looked at the per year earnings is because it's going to give you a broader spectrum over the next couple of years. So if anything I said didn't make sense, let me know. I tried to lay it out as clearly as possible, but I thought the best way to look at the 49ers would be, you know, in a broader picture look, because they're a team that doesn't necessarily, you know, they're not rebuilding. They don't have a new coaching staff. They don't really have salary cap issues. You know, they're not like the Saints. It's not like I can go through and be like, this is what I would do. These are the steps I would take to get cap compliant. It's really, really, the only question is for them, do we keep our quarterback and get less deep, or do we move on to a cheaper quarterback and try and retain as much depth as possible? And either way, I've told you about the players that I don't think are worth. I don't think you should allow them to leave, basically. So thanks for listening, guys. Remember, you can find me on Twitter at PanAmFootball, and, you know, like and subscribe if you like the content. I know I have a very unique kind of style. I like long form stuff, a lot of numbers, but the reaction, again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. The subscriber count is going up all the time. And remember, here at Pan Am Football, we do have a bunch of different styles. We have the podcast, we have the draft talk, and then we have our rotating Monday schedule of different types of things we talk about. And at some point, Seth and I will do the fantasy football after dark, but the scheduling has just not worked out for that, so we have to find a good time. But thanks all, and I will see you next week.